Hello everyone, welcome. Following on yesterday's video, I am going to talk about it a little bit later on. I have completed the reading of that book by Huysmans, The Damned. I'm going to talk about it a little bit at the end of the video, because I'm going to try to join two things together. And this is first on the abuse that we are feeling in society from our politicians who don't seem to be listening to us and seem to be following another course of action as if they were following instructions from somewhere else. And then, as I normally do, I'm going to compare it to the church and see how these two things are happening at the same time, because it's a source of worry for me about the coincidence of both church and state kind of doing the same thing, feeding on one another, it appears almost, or helping each other, and I just don't know what to make of it all. About what is going on in the world, I think we are all kind of wondering about what has happened. My main concern with, first of all, with the state, with politicians, and then I'll go on to the church and what is happening there. Because the two things are going hand in hand. That is why I keep bringing the church, because it's well, anyway. My concern is that, as I have said many times before, in the old days, that is, before 2016. Our politicians seem to us to be responding to our needs. We knew about politicians, about a little bit of corruption here, there, and so on. But there was a sense of, at least in appearance, that's my point, at least in appearance, there was a sense of honor or shame, at least. I mean, if they were caught with their fingers in the cookie jar, they would resign. I have said this many times, okay? What has changed, and this is what I don't understand, or I'm trying to understand, what has changed is that now, if they are caught with their fingers in the cookie jar, they just turn around and say, yes, I was stealing here. Yes, I was laughing at you, so what? That seems to me a little bit exaggerated, obviously, but the reaction that they have, they seem to operate with impunity as to what they do. They seem to be there, and whether they are successful or not, they are moved on to a different place. Some will lose the election. It doesn't matter. They move on and are promoted to an international organization. Others, whatever. Nothing ever happens to them, even if they have done something wrong. I'm not even going to go into crimes, okay? So why? Let me go back, before I make my point, let me go back to Dostoyevsky and the House of the Dead. I spoke about it, months ago. I think I was making another point. Most of you, perhaps some of you have heard what I'm going to say already, but most of you probably haven't. But anyway, this is Dostoyevsky in the 1860s. And he's studying power, yes. He has been a young student, revolutionary and so on. Anyway, he's sent to Siberia. He's in a prison camp, and he notices certain things. First of all, he acknowledges this. He's better educated than most of the criminals there. So he knows that he's going to have a hard time and so on. But he promises himself that he's not going to try to pretend to them that he is one of them or like them. He says they'll just have to eventually accept me as I am. I'm just going to continue to be myself, and if they give me a hard time, well, I'll just have to put up with that, you know. But anyway, he eventually, of course they don't talk to him because he's an intellectual and so on, but eventually they come to respect him, actually, because he doesn't pretend to be, you know, a member of the poor or anything like that. He's just himself, but he is polite, and he's polite because he's actually accepts that he's actually learning a lot from them. First of all, the way they speak. He's a writer, so he's interested in words, and he notices that they are very, in a certain way, they're very articulate. They the turns of phrases and so on. He takes notes. He takes them seriously. He actually respects them. But anyway, he's an epileptic, and quite often he would have these attacks, and so he spent quite a few days, a few times in the infirmary there. Now, at that time, remember that in Russia the serfs were freed in 1861, and he's writing about that time. Okay, so the serfs, we still had serfdom. What happened with the serfs is that one of the punishments, or with criminals, they would you would punish them with lashes. You know, how many lashes for this? 50, 100, 2,000, whatever. He is in the infirmary, and he notices that some criminals, if they have done something wrong, they have to go to this special place and be scourged with however many lashes the crime or the disobedience or whatever it is deserves, or how, you know, the way they punish them. The people who actually do the lashing are called executioners. All right. So he notices that for them, for these criminals, to be scourged is something natural. They just take it for granted. So you see, there are two ways of doing it. One with a regular, he calls it a stick, but I don't know exactly what he means by stick. You know, some sort of, I don't know. He says stick in the translation at any. But they could put up with that. But the most painful one is the birch tree, the branches of the birch tree, because they cut into the skin. And so if they were punished with, let's say, 1,000 lashes, they would have to stop at about 200, or he goes into great detail about it. And then stop there. They would go to the infirmary. They would give them time, 2 or 3 days, for the wounds to heal a little bit, and then they would have to go back and get another 200 or whatever. And what he noticed was that when they came to the infirmary to have that little break, they would talk to themselves. How many lashes have you got? Oh, I've got 100. What, with the birch? Yeah. How many have you got? How many have you got to go? I still got 350. And you, how about you? I got 100, but I still have 1,000 to go. They would talk normally about it. And he was taking notes about all this, but he was also taking notes of the executioners. And he noticed, I'm going to summarize it, and he noticed what you might call 4 stages in the executioners, the people who are actually doing the lashing and have the power. First of all, he notices that when they are new, they do their job. They have to, otherwise they would be receiving the lashes themselves. They do their job. So 100, 100. They start counting 1, 2, 3, and so on. But he notices that at first, in the first 6 months at any rate, they are aware that they are inflicting pain. They're doing their job, but they are aware of the pain that the lashes cause on the criminals. Afterwards, the second stage, as it were, they get used to it. So it doesn't matter. They don't feel any empathy. They don't feel any empathy at all. Okay, how many? 100, 100, 1, 2, 3. That's it. Then there is a third stage that he notices, and this happens to all of them. And that is that they are not yet enjoying, but aware of their power. So what they expect is that when the criminal comes in to be scourged, that he acknowledges the power that he, the executioner, has. And the criminals know this. So they go into this dramatic act. They throw themselves, they on the floor, they get on their knees. Oh, please, go easy on me. I have a wife and 8 children. They plead and they beg. They know that they're going to get the lashes. But they have to go through this ritual and this ceremony. And in fact, they're saying, I know that you are powerful and I am not. And the experienced convicts know that. The rookies, the ones who have just arrived at the prison camp, are still kind of proud. I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to plead. I'm just going to go there and grind my teeth and I'll take it and so on. And those get it worse. They didn't acknowledge their power. You see, you have to get on your knees and then at least you receive the normal amount. Okay. The most dangerous one is the fourth one, the fourth stage, as it were. And that is different. And that is when decadence, and he explains degeneracy begins. Because now it's not just a matter of having their power acknowledged, but that they're actually now getting pleasure out of inflicting pain. And this is the danger, he explains, that once you derive pleasure from hurting others, that is a snowball that it's very difficult to stop. Because it's like a drug. You are deriving pleasure, and so you need more and more and more. The pleasure that you derive from giving 100 lashes may not be enough tomorrow or next week. You need something else. And then you get into almost sadism. Yeah, he explains, Dostoyevsky goes into, he's a great psychologist that he goes deep into the human soul there and messes about with it. And all right, so this book influenced me greatly. So whenever I think about politics or the church, but let's leave that aside for the time being. When I think about politics nowadays, I sometimes have wondered this contempt that they seem to have for the population. This is happening in the West. It's not just this country or the other country. It seems to be happening in the West. I don't know whether it's my imagination. I don't think it is. Are they actually getting pleasure from the contempt that they showed for the population? What I'm suggesting here is that it seems as if this could be a conspiracy theory, but it is my opinion. There seems to be in the global governance thing, the 1%, the billionaire, whatever it is, the financiers, they seem to be, in my opinion, actually are the puppeteers. They are the ones who tell the governments, the politicians, our politicians in our own countries, what they must and must not do. I'm not talking about individual little policies about building roads. I'm talking the direction of government. And they respond to them and not to the population. And this perhaps has been going on for a long time, but since 1916 we have begun to notice it much more. It seems, as I said in another video, as if they have been smoked out. I don't know whether it is out of despair because things are not going well, or actually out of exaggerated confidence because things are going that well that they can display themselves. I don't know. My feeling is that our politicians of whichever party are there because the green light has been passed on, that they are okay to be there. In other words, they're not there really because people have voted for them. The powers that be, this is my conspiracy theory, make sure they decide that this one or this one or this one, but if they totally disagree with this particular one, that particular one has no chance. So they have all been accepted. And if I were to exaggerate, I would say even put there by the powers that be. I had another video talking about women and my disappointment with most of them. And I explained the reasons why. But let me just go over again this idea that they are put there or approved, let us say, beforehand by other forces that are not necessarily the population. I believe they're chosen or pre-chosen because they all have a characteristic in common that I have been noticing. I'm not a psychologist, so I'm making all these up as I go along. It is my opinion. If I look at politicians, for example, let's go to, got some of them written down here. Okay, the former Prime Minister of Finland, Sanna Marin, a young lady, pretty, and so on. I see. Okay, she has been. She lost the election, but she did one thing, which I see was her role to do, and that was to get Finland into NATO. It doesn't matter that she lost the election. Now she will move on to bigger and greater things. This was a young lady, pretty, beautiful. They call her the dancing queen. She used to go to nightclubs. Okay. But there is something that I find in common to many women in power, in politics nowadays. Not all of them, but many of them. That is that they're very compliant. They're very obedient. to that 1% who holds power. Young women especially, well educated, but not very wise, they're still a little bit young, want to prove themselves, especially women. They want to show that they can do the same thing as men, and they could be as tough and as hard as men, and so on. So while, in other words, they have something to prove. And when you have something to prove, and those people who are in a way manipulating you, they know your soft spot. Okay, so if you have that soft spot, you may be chosen because you are more pliable. Ursula von der Leyen is, again, I put her not terribly brilliant intellectually or anything, but she had something, falls into this category of wanting to prove that she can be as tough, that she can do the same thing as men, this soft spot with women. All right, so there are other women who do not have this soft spot. For example, Victoria Nuland in the United States, or what is the name of Chrystia Freeland in Canada, the Deputy Prime Minister. That is based on something else. They are chosen for a different reason. They are already self-assured. They know that doing the same thing as men do that is not what it is about. But they, in this particular case, they do have something in common, and that is that they parents or grandparents were Ukrainians who were most probably imprisoned during the war or after the war by the Russians and so on. There is a certain hatred there, I think, against Russia. I'm not saying whether they are right in their political opinions or not, that's another video. But the hatred for Russia is there. And so you can depend on someone who hates your enemy, because it's deep down, it goes deep down, yeah. They're not trying to impress you, they just want to exercise what that hatred originates. Of men, well, Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand, that's another one of the ones that have something to prove, yeah. Again, she lost the election, it doesn't matter, she will be moved on, she did what she had to do. Now let's talk about some men. For example, Justin Trudeau. I'm sorry, I'm going I don't know whether I sound like a psychologist or a father confessor or something. I'm just giving you my opinion, because my point is that these people get there because they are pre-chosen. All right, according to their own characteristics. Okay. So, Trudeau is not very bright. We can all see that. Okay, but Trudeau is very obvious to me. Is the typical rich kid. And therefore has the arrogance of that rich kid who's not very bright, but he has certain luxuries that he can dispose of, and so he has never had to struggle to get what he has. It was sort of handed over to him in a silver platter. And so it's that vanity, that comes to him from being part of the club of the powerful ones. Yeah, that is his soft spot. That is probably why she has that lady there, Christia Freeland, that can support, because the hatred from her is there, and so she can make sure that he doesn't go off on a tangent, as it were, with some stupidity or his vanity and so on. Okay, so he just wants to be part of the powerful and so on. Boris Johnson is a clever man and well educated, and he has this ability, and that is why so many people voted for him. First of all, because he said and promised that he would do the Brexit thing and so on. But what attracted people, besides the fact that he promised he would actually complete the Brexit thing, was that he had this, I think, his charisma, especially to the English, because politicians are all the same everywhere. People yearned almost for that traditional English, I can't think of the word now, that is different from eccentric, that is different from everybody else. It's sort of an English characteristic that is very much, it used to be displayed by the aristocracy and so on. And he has a certain charisma, so people flock to him. What happened was that practically the next day after he won the election with a huge majority, he started talking about net zero and the climate emergency. And they said, what? I thought you were going to do the Brexit thing. Well, he did, but then he didn't move on from there, stopped, and then it was all net zero. Okay, so he fulfilled a certain purpose because he is a little bit unmanageable. As a student in Oxford, it is known that he used to belong to, I say this, the English people know this because he has been in the papers when he was elected and so on. But those outside the United Kingdom, you may not know. It's not terribly important, but it is. It goes to character. He used to belong to a club called the Bullingdon Club, where these rich kids, just for fun, would go to poor people, sometimes begging in the streets. There weren't very many people begging in the streets in those days, but they would go to places where they would see workers and people and start burning £50 notes in front of them. That's a lot of money, £50, even today. So when he was a student, it was probably quite a lot. The pleasure of burning, I know you're young and you're rich and it's a lot of fun. But there would be some rich kids who would find that a little bit offensive or in bad taste. He didn't, nor did Cameron, who was the previous Prime Minister. So, was he chosen? Perhaps not, but then he was let go when he was of no more use, as it were. Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak is the Prime Minister at the moment. And he's British of Indian descent. Some say it was a coup because no one voted for him, not even his party. He just appeared there. Somehow he was suddenly Prime Minister. How? Well, we don't know. Someone put him there. I find him fascinating because, well, fascinating is probably not the right word, but I think I can understand him. Because, let me tell you why. First of all, very short in stature. I can almost see in his smile that he's not terribly sure of himself. Now, he's a multimillionaire. He married the heiress to a fortune. I'm getting. His wife is a billionaire. Okay, so what do I mean when I say he's insecure? Well, okay. Look at his smile. He's always... It depicts a man that he's trying to please. That is what I mean by not sure of himself. And I can see how that have come about, because I have always been an outsider myself, so I know what it feels not to be quite part of the group, part of the club. So if you see this little kid from Indian descent go into the best private schools, we call them public schools here in England, but it's the fee-paying, very expensive, typically where the nobles and the aristocrats would go. That is the school he went to. His parents are, one was a chemist, I believe, middle class. Not multimillionaire, so they probably had to make some sort of a sacrifice to pay those fees. I think that he probably felt a little bit of an outsider around those very upper class aristocratic boys. And he had to fit in. And he was aware, I think, that he was an outsider. Hence, even the little lips that he has when he speaks, which is very peculiar of the upper classes in England. They always have a little lisp or a little this. It's not just the long A's. There is a certain way of speaking, which is not the characteristic BBC. There is something there. And he got it. And he speaks like that. I think his thing is trying always to fit in and be accepted deep down. So obviously he's going to be pliant and compliant. How about the... I'm giving a lecture here. Okay, it's late at night, I have nothing else to do. All right, so thoughts. My pronouncing the German Chancellor. I can't figure him out, how weak he is. We don't consider Germans weak. He's a little bit of a surprise, isn't he? What has he been promised? What is going on with this person who cannot even call for an investigation of the Nord Stream? Or I can't make him out, but he's an extremely weak person. Macron is intelligent, is the typical French functionary, isn't it? But he says one thing one day, the other thing the next. I mean, he's just, trying to please everybody. So, but he is one of the club, for sure, yeah. President Biden, I would say that he is a spiritual invalid. This is what I mean. I don't think that he lies. I think that he doesn't know the difference. I really think that he doesn't know the difference of what is a lie and what is not. I think that if you were to have him for dinner and you said, well, I went to this school and I lived in North Carolina and he would say, oh, me too. I used to, I graduated from this school, me too. I don't think he knows the difference. Which is different from being a liar. He has. That's it. I'm going to leave it there. Okay. Let me finish with this with this story of politicians. But because what I notice now is that I have talked about being compliant and making sure that you follow, the instructions and the soft spot that they can choose and manipulate and so on. But right now, they don't even need that. Now they're giving us giggling girls. They're not even bright. I mean, there's who is. Okay, yes, Kamala Harris, I mean, the giggling girl. There is another one that has just been appointed or commended or something, Mandy Cohen, who is going to be the CDC director, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. You remember the COVID thing and all that? And this is a young girl, and she giggles when she speaks about how she was the health director in North Carolina. And when they ask her about how she, did the restrictions and so on, she giggles. Say, "Oh, I used to call someone and said, what are you doing? Are you going to do this? Oh, I'll do it too on Monday. Okay." And she giggles all the way. And the other one who was going to be, you remember the singing girl who was going to be what? The misinformation czar or something like that. And she used to sing songs, da, 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 like Julie Andrews on TikTok. What is going on? So you remember Tucker Carlson? He made fun of that in the World Economic Forum, that they had this lady playing, like simulating playing the flute or something, and she would go hoo, 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 hoo. Well, this is what we have at the moment, just giggling girls. What is going on anyway? Okay, so to go back to this power thing, my point is this. I think I see it as the way they treat us as also a little bit of sadism. Not physical, obviously, but psychological. I think we're experiencing that. They are there on our face saying there is nothing you can do about it. And we don't, because we are fearful. of what they might do. This is what I mean. During the COVID thing, we all obeyed, some more than others. During the January 16th, there was this demonstration and so on, but I think the whole thing afterwards is to keep the lid on, because when the masses, when the mob realizes that they are being had, when you have some leaders and then the whole flood goes, they know that when the mob starts, is upset, that they usually, the heads of the powerful, their heads get chopped off in a guillotine, and they fear that. Not literally, but they fear that the mob, that the masses, the mob is what they probably call us, will rise up. And so the thing is to keep the lid on. Keep the lid on. Okay, don't let it. So that is why I think we see things that we have never seen before. You know, the Canadian truckers there in a demonstration, and their bank accounts were closed down, and that had never been done before. I can imagine someone saying, do something, they have to go home, they cannot continue to be there. Because remember, what they're trying to avoid is, for example, in the Iraq war, okay, demonstrations everywhere and so on. They don't want that. So you have to keep the lid on. Those truckers must go home. Do whatever you have to do in order for them to disperse. Do this, do that. But we have never done the bank account. Never mind. You just do what you have to do. Okay. And I see January 6th more or less in the same way. There was some truckers in America starting and so on, but they put the lid down, and there are no demonstrations anywhere about anything. And they have to keep control of the situation. Okay, so if it means parents before a school board and the FBI calling them domestic terrorists, whatever, you must not allow the multitudes to start, a revolution of some sort. Okay, so what I think is what is happening now is that I would refer to that as also sadism, but psychological one. Let me take a pause here, just a second. Okay, now let me put that politics aside and turn the page and talk about something completely different. And this is about Christianity and what is happening at the moment. I'm not going to go into names out of respect for offices, but let me first tell you, in the last video that I did, I showed you this book, The Damned, by a French author, 19th century author, Huysmans. And I have learned a little bit more about it, and I'm going to actually purchase his biography, written by one of the translators, an Oxford professor in 1955. I haven't read that yet. But these are 4 books. This guy is a 19th century person who is concerned about the new fashion in France, and not only in France, about what they called spiritualism. And the satanic and the demonic and magic, black and white, and all these kinds of things that seem to become fashionable among the gentry especially. And so the book is about the protagonist is a writer who is investigating and researching something that happened in the 14th century, because he's trying to study this new fashion in the 19th century of spiritualism. And he calls it was called spiritualism, but it was really magic and Satan and all kinds of weird things. And he knows, and this is apparently a true story, and there are documents, because there are trial documents of everything, about something that happened to a nobleman in France in the 14th century. One of the most powerful noblemen in France at the time, extremely wealthy. A knight, he would fight in wars. Apparently he was there with Joan of Arc or something like that. But then something happened and he flipped, and he became one of the most horrid criminals in the history of France, in that he engaged in Satanism, whatever that was, invoking the devil, I suppose. But anyway, he ended up killing a lot of people and sacrificing a lot of people in his castles, and he would move from castle to castle. And he ended up kidnapping children and abusing them and sacrificing them, the most horrid things. To the point that the villagers, when they saw him or his henchmen coming around, they would bolt their doors and keep the children inside, because children were disappearing by the hundreds in all the villages. So the protagonist of the book, of this book, is investigating this. And he's talking to people about, could this be true? And he's looking at the documents and so on. And one of his friends said, but why are you surprised? I mean, this Satanism thing has been going on forever, and it's still going on today. What do you mean it's going on today? Of course it is. You mean sacrificing children? Well, I don't know whether exactly that, but something similar things are going on, yes. And so he gets involved in studying the magic arts, or occultism, or spiritualism, or whatever you want to call it. All right, and he's observing this. The author is observing this. He wants to talk to people who are inside these secret societies, and eventually he gets to talk to one of them, and he's told that these, let's say, satanic or diabolical or whatever practices, the worst ones are done by people from inside the church. In other words, priests gone rogue. People from outside the church can do, other things and so on, but these are the ones that truly hate, that guttural hate the church for whatever reason. And he discusses the different reasons. But it's always the one priest who is engaged in sacrilege, as we would say. And I want to tell you, let me see, because I want to read to you some of the things that are involved in the book. Talking about a priest who would, he says, about the hatred of the church, but specifically hatred of Christ, the crucifix on the Christ on the cross. And he says, what could be going on in the brain of a man, this particular priest, who had had the figure of Christ tattooed on the soles of his feet in order to trample all the better on our Lord? A priest doing all kinds of things during the Mass and sacrileges with the host and things like that, okay? Who would have the figure of Christ tattooed on the soles of his feet in order to trample all the better on our Lord. What hatred such an action reveals. Did he despise God for not having blessed him with the ecstatic madness of a saint, or more probably giving human nature for not having promoted him to the highest ecclesiastical honors? Well, that might not be the case, because some of them are actually, in the book at any rate, quite high up in ecclesiastical honors. He says, obviously this priest's spite knew no bounds, and his pride was without limit. But there is nothing to equal the furious transports and sexual delirium of sacrilege. He's going to explain how committing sacrilege in the Catholic Church is actually a source of sexual pleasure. When you have done just about everything, you need, going back to Dostoyevsky, you need more and more and more to satisfy that pleasure. And something that is truly prohibited and damned and, absolutely beyond the pale, that is where you get in order to get this pleasure. In other words, desecrating the sacred can be because of the pleasure that you derive from it. He says, ever since the Middle Ages, it has been a crime reserved, this profaning the sacred. Ever since the Middle Ages, it has been a crime reserved for cowards, for it is beyond the reach of human justice, such that one may commit it with impunity. But for a Christian, it is a crime beyond the pale. And he says, the title of my video, they truly must believe in Christ, otherwise they wouldn't hate him so. He talks about this 14th century guy who had committed all these crimes for sexual pleasure. Eventually he gets caught. He has, first of all, he has two trials. In the 14th century, imagine you have the church and then you have the state, the civil power. Now, the church is going to accuse you of all these crimes and these heresies and so on. But the maximum penalty that they can give him is excommunication. In other words, the church excommunicate if you're involved in, I don't know, heresy, and you don't repent. Okay, so you're outside the church. That's what it means. But there is a huge but here, because I'm not a theologian, so I'm not exactly sure whether what I'm going to say is correct. I'm just going to say what the book says. And that is that after you excommunicate a person, nevertheless, if he repents, you have to accept him back if he truly repents. In other words, you cannot deny someone the sacraments if, however much they have sinned, if they repent and they do penance and so on. You remember the good thief in the cross, okay? He repented at the last minute and God forgave him, kind of thing. So human beings don't know what is going on in the human heart, okay? So you have to accept him back, to give him a chance and so on, to come back to God. But the big but here is that is what the church can do, to excommunicate. But the civil power, the state, nevertheless has a different trial. And this is different because, remember, if you commit a crime, if you kill someone, and you are found guilty and you are punished with jail, whatever, you're punished not because you have committed a sin. That's nothing to do with the state. You're punished because you have broken the law. So even though the church may bring him back to the church and finish with the excommunication and so on, nevertheless the civil power will judge you and condemn you because killing children is a criminal act. Okay, so he's condemned to death by the civil power. But he has a very dramatic passage here when he confesses, he repents during the church's judgment. And he starts crying and pleading and so on, this 14th century guy, okay? And apparently there are documents attesting to this, so I assume that in some sort of way it's a true story. And he starts telling of all the crimes that he has committed, all the people he has killed, all the children, that are absolutely abhorrent atrocities with children, okay? You think, 14th century? But anyway, this is the author now, I'm reading. He spares no detail, mechanically enumerating his crimes. The account is so incomprehensible, so atrocious, because there were thousands of children, so atrocious that beneath their golden mitres the faces of the bishops become drawn and pale. These priests, tempered in the flames of the confessional, these judges who, even in this epoch of demonomania and murder, have never heard a more terrifying sequence of confessions. These prelates, familiar with every human abasement, whom no depravity has ever astonished them. These priests make the sign of the cross, and one of them rises and, from a sense of decency, veils the face of Christ in the crucifix. And he continues saying that he explains how, for many people, sacrilege, to go straight into offending publicly and so on Christ, or the figure of Christ, or the representation of Christ, or whatever, is something that provides sexual pleasure. However, you have the ones that display themselves. You understand why I'm talking about this, okay? So the atheists, the theosophists, the Kabbalists, the spiritualists, the Hermetic philosophers, the Rosicrucians, the secret societies, with satanic societies and so on, they remind me, the author says, when they are not out and out crooks, of simply children stumbling around in a darkened cellar. They are not the main ones. Are they cracked? Why? Now bear with me, because this is important. He's going to say, no, they're not mad. Are they cracked? Why? The cult of the demon is not more insane than the cult of God, but one is rotten and the other resplendent. That is the difference. On that basis, anybody who worshipped a god, any god of any description, would have been demented. No. The affiliates of Satanism are mystics of a sort, but mystics of a vile order, though it is most likely that their exaltations to the evil one are not unconnected with the disorders of their frenzied senses, for lust is the mother of demonism. I am convinced that for them the invocation of the devil is only a preliminary to the carnal act. He's connecting the two things all the time, but it's always like that. The tail end of the centuries all resemble each other. There are always periods of vacillation and unrest. Magic and the demonic always flourishes when materialism is rife. And this phenomenon reappears every 100 or 200 years. And you can have several emblems. He goes on, he quotes the black billy goat showing off his horns. I don't know what he's talking about here. But anyway, so different things and rituals that they do. And then the pessimism. Without getting involved in questions which would take years to resolve, I must say I'm amazed at this placid utopia which believes in the perfectibility of man. Surely human nature is selfish, intolerant, and vile. Just look around ourselves. Constant struggle, a society which is cynical and cruel. The poor and humble, the masses, forever fleeced and abused by the powerful ones. Everywhere I look, I see the triumph of those without scruples, the apotheosis of crooked politicians and financiers. And they call themselves progressive. This in the 19th century. What progress can possibly be made against such a tide? No, man is just the same as always. His soul was corrupt in the days of Genesis, and it is no less rotten and riddled with vice today. Only the nature of things changes. Progress is the hypocrisy in which vice is refined. Then he talks about one mystic from the 12th century, Raymond Lull. I will tell you about him. He's Spanish in some other video or other. But he just wants to conclude. He says, that the ones who actually do the performances and so on for public display, he says, they are nothing more than a joke. They serve as a convenient cover for the kind of Rosicrucian. I don't know what a Rosicrucian is, but anyway, they serve as a convenient cover for the kind of Rosicrucian who prefers to disguise his more repulsive essays in demonism. They, the ones behind it all, these will never admit openly to devil worshipping. What a twisted world we live in. Nobody believes in anything anymore, and yet everybody swallows everything they're told, wholesale. In the Middle Ages, they were more simple, but less stupid. As we know only too well, today's spiritual leaders all have false hearts, dysenteric souls, and coarse minds. Or worse still, they glow in the darkness of their own purulence, pus, corrupting the very flock they have been charged with protecting, these Satanizers. And just to think that this century, the 19th century of positivism and atheism, has overthrown everything except Satanism. Satanism has not been forced to yield an inch. The reason for that is obvious. Satan had become forgotten or neglected. It was Father Ravignan, I believe, who showed that the vilest stratagem the devil employed was to get people to deny his own existence. And then his friends talks about the young and what are we going to do about the young and what is coming and what are their prospects. And he says, in total despair, they will turn out the same as their parents. They will stuff their guts with food and evacuate their souls through their bowels. The book ends in despair, but the following one will not be. What happened here was that the author was curious and wanted to be part of these societies, and it comes as a surprise that all these things were going on and so in the 19th century. Uses the 14th in order to explain what is happening in the 19th and how these things are becoming fashionable, but then they degenerate into more and more and more. Anyway. But the thing is that he is at first interested, and that is why he writes this book. But then there is a journey. And the next book is En route. And the third is the cathedral, and the last one is the, what is it called? The oblate. And this is his journey to the Catholic Church. Inevitable, I would say. Why do you say inevitable? Well, you have to read the books, but once you get into this thing, anyway, if you're interested, read the books. I am going to read his biography, and I think that what is happening today in the church is has to make us pause a little bit. To my non-Catholic or Protestant Christians, I would say to you that what is happening in the Catholic Church with the present curia is serious. I would say to my Protestant fellow Christians that Catholics are not your enemies today. If you want to do away with Christianity altogether, you have to go for the Catholic Church. Going for one or another Protestant denomination is not going to do it. The difference is that the whole thing is the sacrifice of the Mass. And that is what has to be whitewashed in some way. And we are seeing in the Catholic Church today absolutely abhorrent things. Child abuse is being promoted. The name of Christ almost forgotten. Instead, the brotherhood of man, not Christ or God, but the architect of the universe. And this is at the very top of the church. Cardinals and, the two bishops in California at the moment are telling Catholics that they can't go and do a procession against these the men dressed as women and so on. They can't go inside the church to pray the rosary or something. Just be neutral, be neutral. Oh, how convenient to be neutral. At one point when, in other words, it is from inside the church, like politicians in government, that they're telling Catholics to their face, yes, this is what we are doing, and what are you going to do about it? I'm sorry if I'm offending you Catholics, but there comes a point when you have to say, basta, enough. We can no longer say, well, I'll just obey, I'll just follow. No, we have to, whether in politics or in religion, there has to be sometimes, we have to form a sort of an infantry of first line of defense and second line, and have to say no more. How we're going to do this, I don't know. But we have to. Anyway, this has been very, very long, so I'm going to leave it here. I welcome your comments. I read them, and perhaps tomorrow I will answer quite a few, which were very interesting comments. Okay, so thank you for listening. Bye-bye.